Hey guys, welcome back. So this is my first official beginning for the book, and what I want to share with you guys is just the reason I wouldn't say I'm an authority by any means, but in life, but been through a lot of stuff. I mean, most of the time when I tell people about my life, it's hard for them to really believe what I'm saying, and been through a lot of crazy stuff, and that's why I want to share it, is because in today's day and age there's a lot of things that are going on that we really need to be able to step back and understand that we're not alone, that we're not going through things, and we're not in the last of our lives. We're it's just a day, it's just another day. And basically for me, when I was a young kid, my mom and dad got together. Dad went to Vietnam. Mom ended up pregnant. Never met my dad. And I grew up as a kid really battling with that, battling with abandonment, I told the kids in my high school that I was, basically my dad died a Green Beret in Vietnam, so that I was looked at as a kid that lost his dad in a war as a hero, rather than, some kid whose dad didn't want him, just didn't care. And that's something that for me, in the last 54 years, I guess, the total of my life, I've battled with that. Doesn't matter what point in my life I'm at, but I've battled and battled and battled with it. And one of the things that's really hard for me in this book is when you go back and you start looking into what you really did as a kid, what your life was really like as a kid, you think you're over it as an adult, but you realize there's still a lot of pain and hurts there that really are wounds that scarred up over and over and over again. And when you think you got it together and then the pressure kicks in, you find out you're really jacked up. So that's kind of what the purpose is. But I was born in '68, Vietnam baby. And early in my life, my mom couldn't really handle having kids. And what I was told my whole life was that I was adopted by my step parents. They wanted to move, so my mom put me up for adoption. That's my step parents' version. But they basically said that they had adopted me kind of in a package deal with my brother that was their kid, my stepdad's son. But I was kind of the package deal kid, and that really, in a lot of ways, messed me up. I remember the holidays. I remember just the things that went on in my life. I got beat up pretty good. I was a pretty rough kid, but I was also a hard to manage kid. I had a lot of things going on in my heart, and used to tell my stepdad, "You're not my dad." And he had his own issues going on. And as I've grown up, I've realized that I was not the perfect kid by any means. And as a father, I've understood how hard it is to keep my personal pain out of the way I discipline my kids, because I don't feel like beating your kids is the right thing to do. And I also understand that, when my stepdad was doing his stuff, it didn't bring him joy to beat me. It's just how he handled his life. And, it's sometimes we get so angry that we start doing stupid things. But that led me to a place where I was a tough kid, man. And I wasn't really afraid of anybody, never been afraid of anybody, because I was taking fist punches from an adult by the time I was 6 years old. So I didn't really spend my life worrying about getting hurt, getting damaged, getting beat up. I was more, am I ever going to fit in? Am I going to fit into a group? Am I going to fit in? How am I going to find friends? And, my friends were always the weird kids, those little outcast kids that had their own issues going on, and we could kind of help each other through them. But one of the things growing up is when you find that one kid, when you find that one friend that you feel like you're bonded with, you know, you'll do anything for them. And that's how I was. I was willing to do whatever it took for whoever. But as I grew up, I caught myself getting a little more violent. And when I say violent, I just fighting, always fighting somebody, always had to fight somebody. And I wasn't a bully, but I actually stood up against the bullies in our school for the other kids. But I thrived on that fight. And every time I fought to take that pain out that I was feeling about my relationship with my dad and my mom, putting me up for adoption, and the abuse and just the verbal stuff going on in my life. So that stuff messed me up. And, you know, later on in my life, I would find out the truth. And I'll talk about that later. But the truth would come out on at least my mom's version of the truth, biological mother. But, you know, there's a lot of things that people say and do that I think they're just trying to cover up their pain. They don't realize what it does to a kid. And I think a lot of people don't care, because you're a kid, you're going to get over it. Kids are resilient. But in my life, that rejection and that abuse and the verbal abuse and just constantly feeling like I was worth nothing led me down a really dark path. And by the time I was 10, 11 years old, I was already getting into drugs. Funny, I thought it was my brother that started me down that road. That's the way I remembered it. But it actually wasn't. It was one of my stepdads and some of the guys that worked for him. And for some reason, I thought they were my brother's friends. But, you know, these guys would introduce me to shrooms, coke, weed. And I was already smoking, 10, 11 years old, already smoking cigarettes. And I wasn't coming home much. You know, I'd go sit in a park, stare off into La La Land. I hated being home. And step-parents had gotten a divorce. Mom had a new husband or a new boyfriend all the time. My stepmom did. And it really started sending me down a place where I realized I was on my own. And I got an older brother, love my brother, he's one of my best friends. Amazing dad, but his life and my life were substantially different growing up. Even though we lived in the same house, it was his dad that we were living with. And there was definitely a difference in the way that we were treated. I was definitely a problem child. He wasn't, you know, he was a good kid. But I got into some stuff. I took on skateboarding. Skating was my life. And I grew up in an era with Tony Hawk was a little kid. And, you know, we skated it up at the Upland Pipeline Skate Park out there with Mr. Hoffman and his family. And it was one of those things where that was my escape. Skating was my escape. And got into punk music, skate punk, surf punk, whatever it was. And in the 80s, the skate and surf movement was really big in California, in LA and Orange County specifically. And I'd find myself just thriving in that world. Punk was perfect for me because it got my aggression out. It scared people enough that they didn't come into my zone in my life. But I would find myself eventually just being passed around from house to house. There was a time where I lived in Pomona, and anybody that knows Pomona in the 80s, it was a rough place, man. And I don't know now because I don't go there much. But there was a lot of stuff growing up. I remember putting together lowriders, hydraulics with some Chicano guys, a group of gangbangers that lived next to this lady that I was living with for some reason. Don't remember why I was there. Don't remember where my mom was or my dad was. I know they were divorced, but I just don't remember why I lived with this lady for a while. I was just a little guy, 11, 12 years old. And during that time, it became something where you know, these guys, they come over and I'd just be sitting on the porch. They go, hey, Whitey, come over here and hold this for me. You know, and they took me in and started teaching me stuff. But they also taught me the darker side of the world, because I got to see the drugs, I got to see the guns, I got to see the gangs. And we would end up leaving, and just it seemed like every couple of years we were moving. So about the time that I would have a friend, they'd leave. So I spent a lot of my life alone, just looking how I was going to fit in, how are you going to fit into this world, and ended up in a situation where we were living with this guy and one of my mom's husbands, stepmom's husbands, and we lived in an area where I would walk to school, and on my way to school I would have to walk through. I had a choice. I could go up onto the busy road and walk, or I could go down into the ghetto, and I would walk through the ghetto, Laverne. And there was a big gang out there at the time growing up, group of Mexican kids, and they were what you'd call the other side of the tracks. It was that problem area, and man, I don't know, I was so disturbed in my life that I would walk through their neighborhoods. I would walk through and I'd get harassed, I'd get in fights, but I did it every day. It was like, that's the route that I chose. I intentionally chose to go through those areas looking for problems. And you know, by the time I was 13, 14 years old, man, I was already selling weed. I was already doing stuff with kids that I shouldn't have been doing. And you know, I was known for being violent. I was into the whole Satanism thing back in the day. I didn't believe in God. There was no God in my life. There was no need for God in my life. I felt like God was weak and didn't really care about me. So it became one of those things where I'd start beating up kids in my school that were Christian, Mormons, whatever, Jehovah's Witnesses, whoever talked about God, I would beat them up and laugh at them. And I would realize later that those kids were pretty gnarly. Like, they just kept coming and coming and coming. And you don't realize how crazy they can be, but they just kept coming. I'd beat them up, they'd come back. I'd beat them up, they'd come back. I never understood it. And I do now, because I'm in that kind of environment myself sometimes. But what it did was it drove me to a place where I questioned why God would let me go through the abuse, why God, everybody was telling me how great God was, but why, God, would you let me go through this? What did I do to you to make you choose me to go through the abuse, the abandonment, just the hurt and pain? And it got to the point where I was so bitter with God that it was my mission to prove that God was a joke, that God was not real. And everything from, you know, the music I listened to was as dark as you could get. It was as racist as you could get. For the 80s, the punk scene was pretty heavy. Underground alleys, you know, you'd go to, you know, spots in Hollywood that were, you know, not meant for kids. You'd walk down the alleys and guys would be shooting up heroin and acid. You know, doses were given out for free. We'd go to skate houses in Upland where the kids would all be partying and stuff. But I was always looking for that escape, always looking for that escape in my life. And I couldn't find it, man. Nothing could bring that peace. And I started doing the attempted suicide thing. I became really suicidal probably around 13 years old. And you know, I just had some really messed up things going through my head. And I just figured it was easier to die than it was to fight through it. And I didn't understand. And everywhere I turned, somebody was telling me, go to God, go to God, go to God. And I'm like, dude, God's not real. It's not real. I've asked, he's not shown up. So I'd go on for the next couple of years, man, and just drug dealing. I'm going after people. I'm with a girl at that point, pretty steady. And, you know, I had moved out of the house when I was 13, started living with different friends and living with her in her house with her parents and super cool people. And it would become something in my life where even the security of having a relationship wasn't enough for me. I was still empty. I was still hurt. I was super insecure, always worrying about getting cheated on. And she did. She cheated on me a couple times. But, you know, as a kid, you don't realize the pain that you're going to get over it. It didn't, you know, at that time I thought it was it. And I'd go on these little, I'd pop pills. I'd go out and drink as much as I could. And then I'd douse a bunch of pills. And for some reason, I'd always wake up or somebody'd always stop me. And I got so mad that I couldn't finish the job. I get so frustrated and just like, man, what the heck? I can't even stinking kill myself, right? So as time went on, I would realize that I mean, my stepdad's vision for me, every time we'd talk, which wasn't very often, we'd get in these fights and he'd always tell me, you're going to grow up to be a high school dropout, drug dealing punk, you'll be dead before you're 18. And that was his inspiration for me, his inspirational, motivational speech every day that he could get it to me. And I was living in that life. I wanted to be dead before I was 18. I had no intention of living past 18. I had gone after drug dealers. I had gone after, I actually had one incident where, and it was very vital in my life at this point, but I had a couple run-ins with different gangs in LA and whatnot, and different situations, and I'd always come out of them. And there was one kid, there was this one black kid that he jumped me or tried to jump me by the bleachers. It was like 2 o'clock in the morning one night, and he started talking to me. He thought he could get me, so we started rolling around. Ended up, I beat the tar out of this poor kid. I was in a bad place, and I beat the tar out of him, and I thought I killed him. And I laughed at him, kicked him in the head a couple times, and I walked away. And I couldn't believe that he was so stupid. I had no remorse whatsoever, but I couldn't believe that he was so stupid that he would challenge me like that. And at this point, there was a lot of people in my life that were afraid of me, that thought I was absolutely nuts. So at this point, I'm wandering around the wilderness. I'm going to parties. I'm getting in fights. I'm actually going to Chicano parties and looking for problems. Mohawk, tattoos, piercings, makeup. You know, I was in the punk scene, and I go to these Chicano parties, and I go there intentionally looking to get beat, and never could find somebody that could actually take me out, which all that aggression I had inside me was what it was. It was just the aggression and the hurt and the pain that I didn't necessarily want to die. Apparently, I wanted to fight. And that's what I did on a regular basis. I was always fighting. So, you know, it would end up at some point being a life or death situation for me. And you know, I'm going to end it here, but that life or death situation would come up real quick for me in my teens. And it actually would start me down a road that I never expected, never thought I would end up down. But check out the next video. I'm gonna leave it here. I don't want to make these videos too long, but thank you guys for listening. I hope it gets you started right, and look forward to the next one.